So this comes from a client, or some contact. I'm not sure if it's a client, to be honest. It's a contact. And the question is, it's about pre-joining data business keys. So in my source employee table, ID is the primary key, but the real business key is NBR, whatever it means. I don't know. Okay. Other tables, as well as the employee manager hierarchy, use ID as a foreign key, which means that they have a nicely modeled, well, I don't know, but they have at least the database design here in this case followed the advice of their professors in a database 101 class to replace business keys by technical IDs. So that's, I'm not sure about the rest of the model, but that's actually a good advice. So they replace the business keys, they got surrogate keys or technical IDs in the primary keys, and therefore the foreign keys also refer to the primary keys by ID, not by the business key. When I create a hub on ID and a hub on NBR together with the same as link, it looks like a source vault. But at the same time, I don't want to repeat the mapping. For example, joining the historized employee table at the right time from ID to NBR for every single table that references employee. What is the best practice in this situation? So let me just double check that. So you got a source table, employee, the business key is NBR, but the ID, the primary key is the ID. And then the employee manager hierarchy is using the ID as a foreign key. Fine. Okay. So what you're struggling with is you went for a business key that's essentially different from the primary key. That's great. That's what we should do all the time. But then you have other tables that refer to the ID, not the business key, right? And now the problem is in the link, when you load a link, the source of the link must include the business keys, because otherwise, the business keys, the relationship refers to. And those are the business keys that you have in the hub, not the ones that are in the source table, those IDs essentially, right? And that's where people struggle a lot with. And I see also some confusion essentially in some of the answers I saw online. But here's the thing. So the link requires to have the business key in access in the source query essentially when loading the link. Must have the business keys that you went for in the hubs. And because we don't have that, what we typically do is we create a view layer on top of the staging area where we do a pre-join of the business keys that you have. We replace or we extend the source table where the relationship is in by the, we replace the IDs in this table by the business keys that they refer to. That's the basic idea. We call this pre-joining business keys. Now, is this allowed or not? And that's where the confusion is. Well, in the data vault training, in the bootcamp training, we have one slide. We used to have one slide on site. Now it's online, where we discuss essentially the definition of a staging area. And that's where you find the definition that you can denormalize or normalize your data if it's easier for you to process the data from stage to raw data vault. And a pre-join is nothing more than a denormalization. We don't do anything more than that, right? So we just, pre-join the business key. That's it. It's a denormalization. And by doing that, it follows the advice, so it's all good. There's no business rule applied or anything else. We just get the business key essentially involved into the source view, source query essentially. Most simple way. There's a couple of ways how you achieve this. One is to have either a view layer on top of your staging area where you do the pre-joining. You could have in your source query, for example, I believe in the database for DBT package, there is a capability for the pre-joins. That's what I know for sure. And I believe they do it on top of the external tables. You have typically a data lake these days for your staging purposes, right? And in DBT, for example, you have a external table typically on like in a database for your data platform. You have a external table to your data lake where you get the data coming from the stage areas into your relational perspective. And then on top of that, they do the pre-joins. That's my understanding. So that's the basic idea, where you just replace the IDs from the source table or extend them by the business key that you went for by joining from the employee manager hierarchy. You join the employee table on the ID and receive the business key for that. Add that to your source essentially, and then you have it available for loading the link or loading the satellites and so on. That's the basic idea. All right, so that's the best practice. So that's what we do typically. So the data for DBT package has that in mind. It has capability for that. Also, Flow BI is also capable of essentially providing you the pre-joins you have to perform. But then the tool that you use downstream, they have to support that as well as this pattern essentially. But that's what we typically do because You want to avoid, if you can't do that, if you say, well, this can't be true, done. Then you have to use a source vault all the time because in many times. Because in many source systems, you have the business keys replaced by some ID, right? And if you can't do a pre-join or denormalizing your staging area, you have to use those IDs for all the hubs. And that's a source vault, which we don't recommend. So that can be true, right? So that's the idea. I think the same as Linky refers to the fact that you might have the idea of loading both the ID and the business key into your hub employee to essentially, on one hand, load the descriptive data from employee, attach it to the employee number, the business key in the hub, and then attach the employee ID also in the hub so you can link it because of the missing pre-join, essentially, right? That's my assumption from your statement here. You don't need to do that. There is a high risk to some extent that you will use both IDs anyway, but those are other reasons. But so I would recommend using the pre-joins. There's one caveat though. The pre-join we only do inside the system. So if let's say you have two data sources, and both of them are integrated by the technical ID. Have seen this many times, right? They use the technical ID to integrate across systems. Well, from a data perspective, we're looking for a shared key, and that's typically the business key. But in your case, the shared key is actually the ID because that's how they integrate the source systems, and that's what we're looking for. So it's not always about the business key, it's actually about the shared key across the system, so we can use the shared key to integrate across these systems, right? So if the ID is being used to integrate operational systems, it could become the better key from a data perspective. That's as weird as it is. So again, the pre-join we only do within a source system or within a delivery, but never across multiple systems because then you have a waiting state. Again, you have to wait to load the CM data, and you can only load the CM data until the ERP data has been delivered into staging as well, right? And then you have and ERP you can only load when this other system is there and so on. So you wait until 2 a.m. in the morning again before you can load anything, right? That's what you want to avoid. You want to load the data as soon as it's available, and that means we can pre-join inside the system, but not across systems to have no dependencies across systems. That's the reasoning behind that. So pre-join is good, but only within the system. There might be some caveats with CDC and so on. With CDC, just a quick answer. The idea is, the promise is, in CDC, you might have a new hierarchy between employee and manager. So there's a change on the hierarchy. But just because the hierarchy changes doesn't mean that the employee changes. There's no update on the employee, so that's why the employee data set is empty in staging. There's no change, no insert, no update, no delete in CDC now, right? Talking CDC now. But you have a hierarchy. So what do you do now? The pre-join wouldn't work, right? If you join against the employee table, you maybe lose the record if it's an inner join that you use, or have a null value essentially for the business key. That's not a good choice. What we do is, in this case, what about a forward lookup? The thing is this, the business key you went for, the employee number, is in a hub employee. In a satellite attached to that, you have all the descriptive data that describes the hash key of the parent. So you have the hash key of the employee number, and then all the first name, last name, and so on. But also the surrogate key, the technical ID, that's also in a satellite, right? Because if that's not the business key, it's describing the business key. It tells us essentially what's the surrogate key, the technical ID of this employee, essentially, right? So it's descriptive. So we always add all these attributes into the satellite or into some satellite. And the idea is this. Inside the target, inside your hubs and satellites, you have essentially the relationship between the technical ID and the business key. It's in a satellite to the hub, right? So what about this? You have the employee ID inside your hierarchy dataset from the source that's in the staging. You have the ID. You want to replace that by the business key, but you can't join the employee table because it's empty, at least for this business key. So you wouldn't find the ID for your employee there because there's no change on the employee. Instead, you join the satellite in the target because that's where you have from the past, that's the assumption now, from the past, there was a change. And at least the insert of the employee in the past. So you have the sequence inside the target satellite. That way you get the hash key from the satellite So you can join the hub employee on the hash key to get the business key and add that to your source. Now, first of all, it assumes that your CDC is correct. I've seen CDC, self-developed CDC approaches where I wouldn't trust the CDC, but if you're using a standard application, you typically it's not a wide stretch to trust the CDC infrastructure to have delivered the sequence in the past, in an initial load or in a previous delta, essentially, in a previous CDC package. So this join would work. If you can't trust the CDC infrastructure, then I would go for the source vault in this case, because then you have only the ID for integrating your data. I mean, I wouldn't go for source vault. What I'm saying is I would analyze it, but I would end up in a lot of IDs for the hubs. I would capture them in a raw data vault first, and then maybe improve these business keys in the business vault. And yes, if all your data is delivered via an unreliable CDC, then you might end up in a source vault scenario, but I'm analyzing this key by key. If you follow source vault, you don't do that. You just go for the technical ID all the time. You just care for the rest. So that's what I would do. That's the idea. And we can do this forward lookup against the target satellite. You could also do in the view, for example, in a view layer on top of your staging area. And now you say, well, is this allowed? This sounds weird. Well, you do this all the time. When you do a delta check, you also get the latest delta from a satellite and compare it, hash diff, right? Or column-wise, you compare it against the staging area. So you do a forward lookup all the time. And now I'm just adding one more. I mean, the bear is broken, right? So it's fine. So that's the idea. So we do a forward lookup to get a sequence, to get a business key for the sequence we're looking at, and adding that to the view layer on top of our staging. And that way we replace the sequence by the business key in a CDC scenario. That's the basic idea. Cool. Couple of answers here. If you have a question like this, and good question actually, use this form or this link here, sfr.ee/DB Friday, that gets you to a new form now, where you can, just like before, type in your questions. You can also post them on YouTube. I hope the process should work. So let's try it. I mean, post the next question on YouTube and let's see if they end up here with me, essentially. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. To build a scalable design and data platform, read a free Data Vault Handbook by scanning the QR code or following the link. Bye, guys.